Whispers branded Alpha Silas Blackwood, the butcher of the North, a tyrant who banished his own son to the rotting cellars. I believed those rumours when I took the maid job at Blackwood Manor, desperate and starving. I prepared to hate a monster. However, everything changed during my first stormy night. Breaking strict rules, I crept past guards and found the world's most powerful Alpha not on a throne, but curled on the floor, weeping in his sleep. I suddenly realized the true monster wasn't the man locking the door, but the terrible secret destroying him from the inside out. The rain in Silver Creek didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime stick harder. Clara Mitchell stood before the iron gates of Blackwood Manor, her cheap coat soaked through to the bone. She gripped the handle of her battered suitcase, her knuckles white. She wasn't supposed to be here. A human, or at least someone with dormant genes, had no business walking into the den of the most feared pack in the Northern Hemisphere. But debt collectors didn't care about species politics, and the agency had said the pay at Blackwood was triple the industry standard. Now, looking at the Gothic sprawl of dark stone and ivy that looked more like a prison than a home, Clara understood why the pay was so high. This was a place where hope went to die. The gates groaned open, operated by an unseen guard. Clara walked the long gravel drive, the crunch of stones under her boots sounding impossibly loud in the silence. She was met at the heavy oak doors by Mrs. Gable, a stern woman with greying hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Mrs. Gable was a beta wolf. You could tell by the stiff, predatory posture and the way her eyes tracked Clara's jugular for half a second before meeting her gaze. "You're late, Miss Mitchell," Mrs. Gable said, not moving aside. "The bus broke down on the ridge, ma'am. I walked the last 3 miles. Mrs. Gable sniffed the air. "You smell like wet dog and anxiety. We'll need to get you into a uniform immediately. Alpha Blackwood does not tolerate sloppiness." Clara nodded, stepping inside as the woman finally moved. The foyer was immense, dominated by a chandelier made of antlers and iron. But despite the grandeur, the house felt cold. Not just temperature cold, spiritually freezing. There were no photos on the walls, no flowers in the vases, just dust motes dancing in the dim light and the smell of old wax and cedar. "There are 3 rules you must follow if you wish to survive your employment here, Clara," Mrs. Gable said, her heels clicking echoes across the marble floor as she led Clara toward the servants' quarters. "I'm listening," Clara said, trying to stop her teeth from chattering. "Rule number 1. You are to clean the common areas between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. You are never to be seen by the Alpha. If he enters a room, you leave it, immediately. Do not make eye contact. Do not speak unless spoken to." "Understood," Clara said. That was standard for high-strung Alphas. Rule number 2. You do not gossip. What happens in Blackwood Manor stays in Blackwood Manor. If we catch you talking to the press, or even the grocer in town about the Alpha's business, you won't just be fired. You will be hunted." Clara swallowed hard. "I don't have anyone to talk to, anyway." Mrs. Gable stopped abruptly in front of a narrow staircase. She turned, her expression darkening. The shadows seemed to cling to her face. "And rule number 3, this is the most important one." She pointed a bony finger toward the far end of the second-floor landing, where a heavy velvet curtain blocked off an entire wing of the house. "You are never, under any circumstances, to enter the West Wing. You do not clean there. You do not deliver food there. You do not even look at the door. It is the Alpha's private domain, and the territory of things that do not concern you." "Things?" Clara asked before she could stop herself. Mrs. Gable's eyes narrowed. "If you hear sounds coming from the West Wing, crying, scratching, screaming, you ignore them. Do you understand me, Clara?" A chill that had nothing to do with the rain skittered down Clara's spine. "Yes, Mrs. Gable. Good. Here is your uniform. Dinner for staff is at 6. Don't be late." Clara was left alone in a small, sterile room that smelled of bleach. She unpacked her meager belongings, 2 sweaters, a photo of her late mother, and a worn-out paperback book. She sat on the edge of the stiff cot and exhaled. 3 rules, she thought. Avoid the Alpha. keep your mouth shut. Ignore the screaming in the West Wing. She needed this money. She needed to pay off her father's gambling debts before the loan sharks found her again. She could keep her head down. She could follow the rules. But that night, the house began to talk. It started around 2 a.m. Clara was a light sleeper, a habit picked up from years of living in dangerous neighborhoods. She woke to a sound that vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't the wind. It was a low, mournful howl. Not a wolf's howl. It sounded human. It sounded like a child. Clara sat up, clutching her thin blanket. The sound was coming from above, from the West Wing. Ignore it, Mrs. Gable had said. Ignore the crying. Clara tried. She buried her head under the pillow, but the sound changed. It shifted from a howl into a soft, rhythmic sobbing. It was the sound of someone who had given up on being heard, crying only because the pain was too great to hold in. Clara Mitchell had a flaw. It was the reason she never kept jobs for long, and the reason she was always broke. She had a bleeding heart. She couldn't walk past a stray cat without feeding it, and she certainly couldn't listen to a child cry in the dark. Just a peek, she told herself. I'll just see if there's a guard posted. Maybe they need water. She pulled on her robe and crept out of her room. The hallway was pitch black, save for the moonlight filtering through the high windows. She moved silently, her socks sliding on the wood. She reached the main staircase and looked up. The velvet curtain blocking the West Wing swayed slightly in a draught. She ascended the stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot. She reached the curtain and pushed it aside. The corridor beyond was dusty, the air stale. It looked like no one had cleaned here in years. Cobwebs draped over the sconces. At the far end, there was a heavy door reinforced with iron bands. The crying was coming from there. Clara approached the door. She expected it to be locked, barred, maybe even guarded by one of the Alpha's enforcers, but there was no guard. And when she gently pressed the handle, the latch clicked. It was unlocked. She pushed the door open an inch. The room inside was a nursery. But it was a nursery from a nightmare. The wallpaper, once a cheerful yellow, was peeling in strips. There were toys scattered on the floor, but they were broken, headed decapitated from teddy bears, wooden blocks splintered. In the center of the room was a small bed with a cage-like railing, and curled in the corner of the room, not in the bed, was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 5 years old. He was thin, his ribs showing through a ragged t-shirt. His hair was matted, and his skin was covered in dirt. But what stopped Clara's heart wasn't the dirt. It was the collar around his neck. A heavy leather collar attached to a chain bolted to the wall. "Oh my God," Clara whispered. The boy's head snapped up. His eyes were wide and terrified. One eye was a brilliant, piercing blue. The other was clouded, milky white, with a scar running vertically through it. He didn't speak. He didn't scream. He just scrambled backward, pressing himself into the wall, trembling so violently his teeth chattered. He made a small, high-pitched whining noise, the sound of a wounded puppy. "It's okay," Clara whispered, stepping into the room. "I'm not going to hurt you." She saw the bowl on the floor. It contained dry kibble. Dog food. Rage, hot and blinding, flooded Clara's system. They were feeding a human child. No, a werewolf child. Dog food. This wasn't abandonment. This was torture. "Who did this to you?" she asked, kneeling down. The boy pointed a shaking finger towards the door. Clara turned, expecting to see a guard. Standing in the doorway, blocking the light, was a figure that took up the entire frame. He was massive, at least 6'5", with broad shoulders that strained against a black dress shirt. His eyes were glowing a feral amber in the darkness. It was Alpha Silas Blackwood. Clara froze. She had broken all 3 rules in less than 12 hours. Silas stepped into the room. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. He looked from Clara to the boy, his expression unreadable, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle feathered in his cheek. "I told Mrs. Gable," his voice was a deep, gravelly rumble that vibrated in Clara's chest, "that the next maid who entered this room would be executed. Clara's instinct was to run. Every cell in her body screamed predator. Silas Blackwood radiated power, a heavy, suffocating aura that made it hard to breathe. This was an Alpha Prime, a king among wolves. But then she looked back at the boy. The child had curled into a ball, covering his head with his arms, waiting for a blow. Clara didn't run. She stood up. She smoothed her robe, and she stepped between the Alpha King and the trembling child. "Execute me, then," Clara said, her voice shaking but audible. "But if you're going to kill me, do it fast, because as long as I'm breathing, I'm not letting you hurt him again." Silas blinked. The amber glow in his eyes dimmed for a fraction of a second, replaced by pure shock. No one spoke to him like that. Not his beta, not his council, and certainly not a human maid. "You think I hurt him?" Silas asked. The menace in his voice was replaced by something strange. Exhaustion? "He's wearing a collar, sir," Clara snapped, gesturing to the child. "He's eating dog food. You live in a castle, and your son lives in a dungeon. What would you call it?" Silas looked at the boy. For a moment, Clara thought she saw pain flash across the Alpha's face, a look of utter devastation. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a mask of cold indifference. "He is not my son," Silas said. "He is a mistake. He is a child. He is a danger," Silas roared. The sound shook the window panes. The boy in the corner let out a sharp cry and covered his ears. Silas immediately flinched. He looked at the boy, his hand twitching at his side as if he wanted to reach out. He took a step forward, but the boy scrambled away, whimpering. Silas froze. He closed his eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. When he opened them, they were cold again. "Get out," Silas said to Clara. "Pack your things. Leave my house." "No," Clara said. "Excuse me?" I said no. "You can fire me. You can throw me out the gates. But I'm not leaving until I see this boy get a real meal and a blanket. You want to kill me? Fine. But I'm not walking away while a child freezes to death." They stared at each other. The tension was thick enough to cut. Silas Blackwood, the butcher of the North, stared down at the small, defiant woman in a cheap bathrobe. Finally, Silas let out a short, cynical laugh. "You have a death wish, Miss Mitchell." "I have a conscience, Mr. Blackwood." Silas ran a hand through his dark, messy hair. He looked tired. In the moonlight, Clara could see the dark circles under his eyes, the grey hairs prematurely peppering his temples. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a decade. "If you stay in this room," Silas said quietly, "you risk your life. He isn't like us. When the fits take him, he destroys everything he touches." "I'll take my chances," Clara said. Silas stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned on his heel. "Fine, feed him, clean him, but when he wakes up screaming, don't say I didn't warn you." He walked out, leaving the door wide open. Clara didn't waste a second. She rushed to the boy. "Hey," she whispered. "I'm Clara. What's your name?" The boy looked at her with his mismatched eyes. He pointed to a small wooden block on the floor. It had the letter L on it. "L?" Clara asked. "Leo?" The boy nodded slowly. "Okay, Leo. We're going to get that collar off." It took Clara an hour to find the key. It was hanging on a high hook near the door, hidden in plain sight. When the lock clicked and the heavy leather fell from Leo's neck, the skin underneath was raw and chafed. Clara wept silently as she cleaned the wound with water from the adjoining bathroom. She brought him a thick duvet from the guest cupboard and stole a tray of cold roast beef and bread from the kitchen. Leo ate like a starving animal, tearing at the meat with his hands. "Slow down," Clara soothed, stroking his matted hair. "No one is going to take it away." By 4 a.m., Leo was asleep. He looked angelic, despite the scars. Clara sat in the rocking chair in the corner, keeping watch. She must have dozed off, because she was awoken by a sound. It was the crying again. Clara jerked awake, looking at Leo, but Leo was fast asleep, breathing deeply. The crying wasn't coming from the nursery. It was coming from the hallway. Clara stood up, confused. She walked to the nursery door and peeked out. Across the hall, the door to the master suite, Silas's room, was ajar. The sound was drifting out from there. It was the same sound she had heard earlier, the raw, guttural sobbing. Curiosity warred with fear. She shouldn't. She really shouldn't. But her feet moved on their own. She tiptoed across the hall and pushed the master suite door open. The room was vast and luxurious, smelling of mahogany and rain. In the center was a massive king-sized bed. Silas Blackwood was there. He was fully clothed, still wearing the black shirt and slacks, lying on top of the covers. He was thrashing, his hands gripping the sheets so hard the fabric was tearing. "I'm sorry," he moaned in his sleep. "I'm sorry, Catherine. I didn't know. I didn't know." Tears were streaming down the Alpha King's face. He looked nothing like the tyrant who had roared in the nursery. He looked broken. "Don't take him," Silas wept, his voice cracking. "Please don't take him. My son. My little Leo." Clara stood frozen in the doorway, her hand over her mouth. He knew. He knew the boy's name. He called him his son. "He's not a monster," Silas whispered into the darkness of his nightmare. I am the monster." Suddenly, Silas gasped, his eyes flying open. He sat up, his chest heaving, sweat dripping from his forehead. He sensed her immediately. His head snapped toward the door. His eyes were wild, dilated, still half trapped in the nightmare. "Who's there?" he growled, baring his teeth. Clara stepped into the light, raising her hands. "It's me, Clara. I heard a noise." Silas stared at her, his breathing slowing down. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, realizing it was wet. He looked at his hand, then back at her, a look of profound shame crossing his features. He swung his legs off the bed and stood up. He towered over her again, but the aggression was gone. "Did you hear?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I heard enough," Clara said softly. "You love him. You love Leo." Silas turned away, walking to the window to look out at the rain-lashed grounds. "Love isn't enough, Clara. Love doesn't stop the curse." "What curse?" Clara asked, stepping further into the room. Silas turned back to her. His face was a mask of grim resignation. "The curse that killed his mother. The curse that is slowly killing him. And the reason I keep him locked away." He walked over to a small table and poured a glass of amber liquid. He downed it in one go. "Sit down, Clara," Silas said. "If you are going to stay, and it seems you are stubborn enough to do so, you need to know the truth. You need to know why the town calls me the Butcher. And you need to know about the woman who wants my son dead." "Who wants him dead?" Clara asked. Silas's eyes darkened. "Lydia, my advisor. The woman the council wants me to marry." Clara sat on the edge of a velvet armchair. "Tell me." Silas poured another drink. 5 years ago, I had a mate. Catherine. She was human, like you. The pack didn't approve. They said she was too weak to carry an alpha's heir. He paused, the glass trembling in his hand. They were wrong. She was strong. But when Leo was born, something happened. The moon turned red, the livestock in the village died, and Catherine... Silas's voice broke. Catherine bled out. The healers couldn't stop it. Before she died, she looked at Leo and screamed. She screamed that he was hollow, that he had no soul. Clara frowned. "That sounds convenient. For people who didn't want you to be with a human." Silas looked at her sharply. "Lydia was the head healer. She tried to save her." "Did she?" Clara asked pointedly. "Or did she just tell you she tried?" Silas went still. The air in the room grew heavy again. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Clara said, finding a courage she didn't know she had, "that a woman who wants to be queen might not have worked very hard to save the current queen. And she certainly wouldn't want the queen's son to survive." Silas set the glass down. "Lydia says Leo carries a demon. That's why his eye is scarred. That's why he has fits of rage where he throws furniture with his mind." "Telekinesis?" Clara asked. "That's not a demon, Silas. That's power. Rare power." "It's dangerous," Silas insisted, though he sounded less sure than before. "He hurt a guard last year. Broke his arm without touching him. Because he was scared." Clara stood up. "He's a child who has been locked in a room and treated like a dog. Of course he lashes out. That's not a curse, Silas. That's trauma." Silas looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. He saw the fire in her eyes, the fierce protectiveness for a child she had met only hours ago. "You think I've been lied to," Silas said slowly. "I think," Clara said, "that someone broke your son to break you, and it's working." Just then, a sharp, piercing scream echoed from the hallway. It wasn't Leo. It was a woman's scream. "The Alpha!" the voice shrieked. "Help! The Alpha is being attacked!" Silas's eyes went wide. "That's Lydia!" The door to the bedroom burst open. 4 guards in tactical gear rushed in, weapons drawn, and behind them strode a woman. She was beautiful, with cascading blonde hair and a dress that cost more than Clara's entire life, but her eyes were cold, hard flint. "Lydia." She looked at Clara, then at Silas. She smiled, a thin, predatory curve of red lips. "Oh, Silas," Lydia purred. "I came to check on you, and I find you with the help. And talking conspiracy theories, the Council isn't going to like this. They might think you're unstable. Just like your son." She snapped her fingers at the guards. "Seize the girl. She's clearly a spy. And check the West Wing. I think it's time we put the dog to sleep permanently," Silas growled, his claws extending. But 2 guards hit him with tasers. He fell to his knees, roaring. Clara was grabbed by rough hands. "No!" Silas shouted, fighting the electricity coursing through him. "Touch him, and I'll kill you all." Lydia leaned down, whispering in Silas's ear, loud enough for Clara to hear. "You won't do anything, darling. Because if you do, I'll tell everyone the truth, that you're the one who killed Catherine." As Clara was dragged away, she saw Silas collapse, defeat washing over him. But as she was hauled down the corridor, she looked back. The door to the nursery was glowing. A soft blue light was seeping from under the cracks. The broken pup was awake, and he had heard everything. The cells beneath Blackwood Manor smelled of damp earth and rust. They hadn't been used for prisoners in decades. Mostly they were storage for old wine and broken furniture. But the cell Clara was thrown into was empty, save for a bucket and a pile of straw. The heavy iron door slammed shut, plunging her into darkness. "Let me out!" Clara screamed, pounding her fists against the wood until they bruised. "He's just a child! You can't hurt him!" "Save your breath, girl," a voice croaked from the shadows of the adjacent cell. Clara froze. She pressed her face against the cold bars separating her space from the next. "Who's there?" A match flared. In the flickering light, Clara saw an old man. His face was lined like a road map of grief, his hair white and thinning. He wore a tattered gardener's uniform. "Name's Tobias," the man said, lighting the stub of a candle. "I used to tend the roses. Before Lydia decided I knew too much about the soil." "What do you mean?" Clara asked, gripping the bars. Tobias shuffled closer. "You're the new maid, aren't you? The one who went into the West Wing." "I saw the boy," Clara said. "Lydia, she said he has a demon." "She said he killed his mother." Tobias spat on the floor. "Lies. All lies. I was there that night. I was tending the vines under the infirmary window. Catherine didn't die from the birth. She was strong. A human, yes, but strong." Clara's heart raced. "Then what happened?" "I heard them," Tobias whispered, his eyes wide with the memory. "I heard Lydia and the old midwife. Lydia gave Catherine a tonic, said it was to help the pain. But the smell, it drifted out the window. It smelled like almonds and bitter root, wolfsbane mixed with cyanide. It's a slow killer for humans, painful." "She poisoned her," Clara breathed. "She poisoned the Luna to take her place. And she's doing the same to the Alpha," Tobias added darkly. "Why do you think the mighty Silas Blackwood, the butcher of the North, spends his days sleeping and his nights weeping? Why can't he shift any more?" "The whiskey," Clara realized. "I saw him drinking. He drinks constantly." "Lydia stocks his private bar. She laces it with silver ash. It suppresses the wolf. It makes the mind foggy, paranoid. It induces nightmares. She's been keeping him drugged for 5 years, whispering in his ear that his son is a monster, that he is a failure." Clara sank to the floor. It was a coup. A slow, agonizing coup that had lasted half a decade. Lydia had dismantled the most powerful family in the territory without ever lifting a sword. She had used grief and chemistry. "We have to get out," Clara said, standing up with renewed determination. "They're going to kill the boy tonight." Tobias shook his head. "This door is solid oak. I've tried for 6 months." "I haven't," Clara said. She reached into her pocket. The guards had patted her down, but they had been lazy. They hadn't checked the hem of her robe. She pulled out a long, thin metal pick. It was a hairpin she had modified years ago when she lived in a squat in the city. A lockpick. "Old habits," Clara muttered. She reached through the bars of the door, angling the pin into the keyhole. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" Tobias chuckled. "You have no idea." Upstairs, the west wing was vibrating. Lydia stood in the hallway, flanked by 4 armed guards. She held a handkerchief to her nose, as if the very air of this wing offended her. "Open it," she commanded. The head guard, a brute named Cale, kicked the nursery door. It didn't budge. "I said open it," Lydia screeched. "It's locked, Mom. From the inside. The child is 5 years old. He doesn't have a key. Kick it down." Cale took a running start and slammed his shoulder into the wood. The door groaned, but held. And then a sound came from inside. Not a cry. Not a whimper. A low, resonant hum. Inside the room, Leo was standing in the center of the floor. The blue light Clara had seen earlier was now a blinding vortex swirling around him. The toys were floating. The bed was hovering 3 feet off the ground. Leo's eyes were open. The blue eye was glowing like a star, and the scarred white eye was leaking a dark, smoky energy. He wasn't afraid anymore. He was angry. He remembered the woman. Clara, the one who smelled like rain and kindness. He remembered the bad lady taking her away. Bad lady hurt Clara, Leo thought. Bad lady, go away. Outside, Lydia grew impatient. "Step aside." She pulled a key from her pocket, the master key to the manor. She jammed it into the lock and twisted. The door swung open. "Grab him," Lydia shouted. Cale rushed in, taser raised. "Come here, you little freak." He swung the weapon. Leo didn't move. He just looked at Cale. "Stop." The air in the room solidified. Cale hit an invisible wall. The shockwave threw him backward, flying out into the hallway and crashing into the opposite wall with a sickening crunch. Lydia gasped, stepping back. "Shoot him! Shoot the demon!" The other 3 guards raised their rifles. "No!" The roar came from the end of the hall. Silas Blackwood was stumbling towards them. He looked like a wreck, shirt torn, sweating, eyes bloodshot. But he was moving. "Silas, darling, go back to bed," Lydia said, her voice trembling slightly. "You're sick. The boy is out of control. We're handling it." I said. Silas took a step, bracing himself against the wall. The drugs were still coursing through him, making his limbs feel like lead. "Leave. Him. Alone. He killed Cale." Lydia pointed at the unconscious guard. "He's a monster, Silas. Look at him." Silas looked into the room. He saw his son, surrounded by a whirlwind of blue energy. He saw the toys floating, but he didn't see a monster. He saw a terrified little boy trying to protect himself because his father had failed to do so. "Leo," Silas whispered. Silas took a step into the room. The energy wind whipped his hair. "Silas, don't! He'll kill you!" Lydia screamed. Silas ignored her. He dropped to his knees, the posture of submission. He bowed his head, exposing his neck, the most vulnerable part of a wolf. "I'm sorry," Silas choked out, tears mixing with the sweat on his face. "I'm so sorry, Leo. I'm here. I'm not leaving you again." The whirlwind slowed. The floating bed lowered gently to the floor. Leo looked at the giant man kneeling before him, the man who usually yelled, the man who usually smelled like sour drink. Today the man smelled like sadness and love. Leo took a step forward. He reached out a small, trembling hand and placed it on Silas's head. The moment skin touched skin, a shockwave rippled through the house. The blue light flared, then vanished into Silas. Silas gasped. The fog in his brain cleared instantly. The weakness in his limbs evaporated. The connection between Alpha and Pup, a bond that had been severed by trauma and drugs, snapped back into place. Silas stood up. He didn't stumble. He rose to his full height, his eyes flashing a brilliant golden amber. He turned to Lydia. "Run," Silas growled. Lydia didn't run. She was too smart and too desperate for that. She played her trump card. She hit the emergency panic button on the wall, the one reserved for rogue attacks. Sirens wailed throughout the estate. Within minutes, the entire pack council, 5 elders who lived in the adjacent villas, were rushing into the manor. By the time they arrived, the scene had changed. Lydia was weeping on the floor, her clothes torn by her own hand, pointing at Silas and Leo. "He's gone mad!" Lydia sobbed as Councilman Halloway, a stern man with a white beard, entered the hallway. "Silas attacked me. He's trying to unleash the demon child on the pack." Silas stood in the doorway of the nursery, Leo hiding behind his leg. "She is lying." "Look at the guard!" Lydia screamed, pointing to Cale. "The boy did that, and Silas, look at his eyes. He's high on something." Councilman Halloway looked at Silas. "Alpha, stand down. You are clearly unwell." "I am perfectly lucid," Silas said, his voice steady but cold. "We have reports of your erratic behavior for years, Silas," Halloway said. "And now this, hiding a dangerous, unregistered magical user in the nursery. This is a violation of the treaty. He is my son." "He is a threat," Halloway signaled to the dozen enforcers who had arrived with the council. "Take Alpha Blackwood into custody, and neutralize the child. If you touch him," Silas snarled, his voice dropping into the alpha vibrato that forced lower wolves to their knees, "I will rip your throats out." The enforcers hesitated. The power coming off Silas was immense, far stronger than it had been in years. "He is threatening the council!" Lydia yelled. "This is treason! The punishment is death!" "Wait!" The voice rang out from the stairwell. Clara stood there. She was covered in dust, holding a sheaf of yellowed papers in one hand and dragging a struggling Tobias with the other. "Who is this human?" Halloway demanded. "I'm the witness you didn't know you had," Clara said, marching up the stairs. The enforcers raised their weapons, but Silas growled, "Let her pass." Clara walked straight up to Lydia. She didn't look afraid. She looked furious. "Lydia told you Silas was crazy," Clara addressed the council. "She told you the boy was cursed. But did she tell you about the orders she placed with the apothecary in the village? The orders for silver ash and cyanide?" Lydia's face went pale. "She's lying. She's a servant. A nobody. And this," Clara gestured to Tobias. "You all know Tobias, the head gardener for 30 years. Tobias straightened his jacket. "I saw it," he said, his voice raspy but clear. "I saw Lydia poison Queen Catherine, and I've seen her dosing the Alpha's whiskey bottles for 5 years." The council murmured. "Here," Clara handed the papers to Halloway. "I found these in the cellar office. Lydia kept records. She's been embezzling pack funds to pay off the apothecary to keep him quiet." Halloway scanned the papers. His eyebrows shot up. This is Lydia's handwriting." Lydia scrambled backward. "No, they're forged. Silas made her do it. They're lovers." Silas stepped forward. He placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. "We are not lovers," he said, "but she is the only person in this house with a backbone." He looked at the council. "Lydia called my son a demon because he has telekinesis. Look at him." Silas moved aside. Leo stood there, trembling. "Leo," Silas said gently, "show them." Leo looked at his father. He felt the safety of the bond. He lifted his hand. He didn't throw a guard this time. He focused on the chandelier above them. The crystals began to chime. Slowly they rearranged themselves, floating in the air to form the shape of a wolf's head. The council gasped. "That is not demonic magic," Halloway whispered. "That is the mark of the ancient Alphas. The first bloodline." He looked at Silas. "Your son isn't broken, Silas. He is an elemental, the first born in 3 centuries. The silence was deafening. Lydia realized the game was over. Her narrative had collapsed. With a shriek of rage, she pulled a silver dagger from her boot. She didn't lunge for Silas. She lunged for the easiest target. She lunged for Clara. Time seemed to slow down. Clara saw the blade coming. She tried to move, but she was exhausted from the climb and the fear. The silver gleamed under the hallway lights. "No!" Silas roared, but he was too far away to reach her in time. The blade was inches from Clara's chest. Then it stopped. It didn't hit an invisible wall. It was caught. Leo was standing 5 feet away. His hand was outstretched, his fingers curled into a claw shape. His mismatched eyes were burning. Lydia froze in mid-air, suspended as if caught in invisible amber. She struggled, her eyes bulging, but she couldn't move a muscle. Leo tilted his head. He flicked his wrist to the right. Lydia was flung sideways with the force of a freight train. She smashed into the stone wall and slid down, unconscious before she hit the floor. Clara let out a breath she didn't know she was holding, and collapsed. Silas was there instantly, catching her before she hit the ground. He scooped her up into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you." He looked down at his son. Leo lowered his hand, the blue glow fading. The boy looked exhausted, swaying on his feet. Silas knelt, still holding Clara, and opened his other arm. Leo didn't hesitate. He ran into his father's embrace. For the first time in 5 years, the Blackwood family was whole. The council watched in silence. Halloway bowed his head. "The usurper is defeated," Halloway announced. "Long live Alpha Blackwood. Long live the heir." 2 weeks had passed since the purge of the council, and the transformation of Blackwood Manor was nothing short of miraculous. For years, the estate had been a monolith of grey stone and weeping moss, a physical manifestation of the Alpha's grief. The windows had been permanently shuttered, sealing the interior in a tomb-like gloom. But today, the heavy velvet curtains, the ones that had once hidden the secrets of the West Wing, were pulled back. Windows that hadn't been opened in a decade were thrown wide, allowing the sweet, crisp air of the northern spring to flood the hallways. The scent of stale wax and old misery was gone, replaced by the smell of blooming lilac and the rich, earthy aroma of the awakening forest. Clara Mitchell stood on the limestone balcony of the master suite, her hands gripping the wrought-iron railing. From this vantage point, she could see the sprawling grounds in their entirety. The overgrown weeds that had choked the rose gardens were gone. Tobias, looking spry and cheerful in a new uniform, was humming a tune as he deadheaded the prized white roses that Catherine had once loved. But Clara wasn't looking at the flowers. Her eyes were fixed on the emerald expanse of the lawn, where a scene was unfolding that she would have deemed impossible just 14 days ago. A man and a boy were playing soccer. Silas Blackwood looked like a man reborn. The gaunt, haunted hollows of his cheeks had filled out. His skin, once pallid from days spent in whiskey-fueled darkness, was now bronzed by the sun. He moved with a fluidity and power that was breathtaking to watch. No longer the stumbling movements of a drunkard, but the lethal, graceful agility of an Alpha Prime. He was laughing, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to startle the birds in the trees. And Leo. Clara felt a lump form in her throat. The boy was unrecognizable from the shivering, starved creature she had found in the dark. He was wearing clean denim shorts and a bright red t-shirt that fit him perfectly. His hair, once matted with grime, was clean and fluffy, bouncing as he ran. He was chasing the ball, his little legs pumping furiously. "Gotcha!" Silas roared playfully, pretending to trip over his own feet to let the boy pass. Leo giggled, a sound like silver bells, and kicked the ball. But he didn't just kick it. As his foot connected, a shimmer of blue light wrapped around the leather sphere. The ball curved mid-air, defying physics, and zipped past Silas's outstretched hands to hit the makeshift goal post. "Hey, that's telekinesis!" Silas shouted, feigning outrage. "That's a foul, referee!" Leo just shrieked with delight, raising his hands in victory. Clara smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. It was a sad, wistful smile. She turned away from the happy scene and looked back into the room. Her battered suitcase was sitting by the door. It was packed. Her work here was done. Technically, she had been hired on a probationary contract. That contract had been terminated the moment Lydia was arrested, and the house rules were abolished. Mrs. Gable, who had undergone her own transformation from prison warden to a surprisingly doting grandmother figure, had offered to process Clara's final paycheck with a generous bonus. Clara walked over to the suitcase. She placed her hand on the worn handle. It was time to go. She was a human, mostly. She had dormant genes, sure, but she wasn't a wolf. She didn't belong in this world of high stakes, magic, and pack politics. She had been the wrench that fixed the machine. But now that the machine was running, the wrench was no longer needed. I should just slip out the back, she whispered to herself. No goodbyes. Goodbyes make it harder. She picked up the suitcase. The weight of it felt unfamiliar, a reminder of her transient life. She turned towards the door, intending to head down the service stairs. Going somewhere? The voice was low, smooth, and instantly made her heart stutter in her chest. Clara froze. She turned around slowly. Silas was standing in the doorway of the balcony. He was leaning against the frame, arms crossed over his chest. He was breathless from the game, a sheen of sweat glistening on his forehead. His black t-shirt clung to his chest, and his eyes, those intense amber eyes, were locked on her suitcase. Yes, Clara stammered, her grip on the handle tightening until her knuckles turned white. Mrs. Gable said the paperwork is done. The new staff is arriving tomorrow. You don't need a maid to sneak around and break into rooms anymore. Silas didn't move. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. Is that what you think you are? Just a maid who broke a few rules? It's what I am, Silas, Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm a human with a dormant gene and a lot of bad luck. You're the Alpha King. The crisis is over. You have your son back. You have your pack back. Order is restored. And you think order includes you leaving? It makes the most sense, she lied. Silas pushed off the doorframe. He walked toward her, moving with that silent, predatory grace that commanded attention. He stopped just inches from her, close enough that she could smell the scent of fresh grass, cedar, and the unique, masculine musk that was purely him. You're right, Silas said softly. I don't need a maid. Clara felt a sharp pang in her chest, a physical ache of rejection. She looked down at her boots. Right. Well, I'll just be on my... I need a partner. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Clara blinked, her head snapping up. What? Silas reached out and gently pried her fingers off the suitcase handle. He set the bag down on the floor and took her hands in his. His palms were warm and rough, engulfing hers. Leo spoke today, Silas said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. To someone other than me. Clara's breath caught. He did? Yes, we were eating breakfast. He asked where you were. But he didn't call you Clara. Clara waited, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He asked where his Clara mom was. Tears instantly welled in Clara's eyes, blurring her vision. A sob escaped her throat before she could stifle it. He didn't. He did, Silas confirmed, a tender smile playing on his lips. And frankly, Clara, I was wondering the same thing. I looked at the empty chair across from me, and the house felt cold again. Even with the sun shining, it felt cold without you. Silas, I can't, Clara whispered, a tear tracking down her cheek. I'm not a Luna. I'm not nobility. The council, the pack, they want you to have a mate with a pedigree. Someone strong. Someone who can shift. Silas released one of her hands to cup her face, his thumb brushing away the tear. Listen to me, he commanded, his amber eyes burning with intensity. A Luna is not defined by her claws, Clara. She isn't defined by her bloodline, or how loudly she can howl at the moon. She is defined by her heart. He stepped closer, invading her space, wrapping her in his heat. You walked into a room that grown men were afraid to enter. You stood between a monster and a child with nothing but a bathrobe and your courage. You saved my son's soul. You saved my life. That is the most wolf thing I have ever seen. You are more of an alpha than half the men in my council. Clara looked at him, searching for any sign of hesitation, but found only raw, honest adoration. But I'm broken too, Silas, she confessed. I have debts. I have a past. We are all broken, Clara, Silas murmured, leaning his forehead against hers. I was a drunk who abandoned his child. Leo is scarred and feared by the world. We are a family of broken things. But together we fit, he stroked her cheek. Stay, and help us build something better. Stay, and make this house a home. Stay with me. Clara closed her eyes, breathing him in. She thought of the lonely road, the cheap apartments, the life of running. And then she thought of the boy with the mismatched eyes and the man holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. She opened her eyes and smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. Okay, she whispered, I'll stay. Silas let out a breath of relief, as if he had been holding it for hours. He didn't just smile back. He leaned down and captured her lips in a kiss that tasted of sunlight, redemption, and second chances. It was a promise sealed in breath and skin. Suddenly a chorus of high-pitched giggles erupted from below. Clara and Silas broke apart, looking down at the lawn. Leo was standing there, clapping his hands. His eyes were glowing that brilliant electric blue. Around them, the garden began to stir. 100 white rose petals detached themselves from the bushes. Guided by the boy's joy and his power, they took flight, swirling upward in a fragrant, spiraling vortex. They danced around the balcony, raining down on Clara and Silas like nature's own confetti. Silas laughed, pulling Clara tight against his side as the petals fell around them. The broken pup wasn't broken anymore. The Alpha King was no longer a monster, and the maid who had walked in from the rain had finally found exactly where she belonged. And that is the story of how a single act of courage changed the fate of the Blackwood Pack. It reminds us that sometimes the monsters aren't the ones with claws and fangs. They are the people who choose cruelty over kindness. And true strength, it isn't about how loud you can roar. It's about who you are willing to stand in front of when the world tries to hurt them. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. And tell me in the comments, would you have dared to open that nursery door? Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.